Alright, good morning everybody. Just bonked my head on my heater. Sorry if it's a little loud, but today we have a 2017 Toyota Rav4 that we're going to be doing front and rear pads and rotors, excuse me. So we're going to walk you through that step by step, and let me know if you guys have any questions along the way. Let's get to it. Alright, the first step, trying to figure it out, is on this particular car we have hubcaps kind of covering up access to the lug nuts. Just use a plastic pry tool to make sure we didn't damage the hubcaps. So there we go. Make sure that you take your time with those. Don't snap them, don't break them. Alright, to start out we're going to use a 21mm impact socket to get these lug nuts off, give us access to the caliper bracket and the rotor. Forgot the name. Alright, sometimes the wheels get stuck. You gotta give them a little kick from behind. It's all the corrosion on the front of this rotor that's keeping that on there. Alright, for the next step we're going to need two things to take the caliper bolts off. The slider pin bolts is a 14mm, so we're going to use a 3/8 14mm, and a 17mm wrench just in case to grab onto the nut that's right on the other side of that. Let's get her off. Shouldn't be too tight on the slide pin bolts. You just get those loose so that you can spin them out by hand. Put a wrench in there just in case. Spin those out. I like to keep track of all my parts on top of a tool mat here so I don't lose them. Alright, just like that we've got our caliper out. Alright, our next step is to compress the piston on the caliper. I did open the hood. I opened the brake fluid reservoir, making sure it's not too full. I usually like to put a rag in there just to make sure that we don't get brake fluid all over the floor. Sometimes you're able to compress these just by using the tool. Sometimes you have to put some brake pads in there to help spread it. We'll see if we're able to here. Really do like this ratcheting type. It just seems like it gives better force. I do have a pistol grip type where you just apply pressure and squeeze. In most cases this works, and it works better. Alright, we just want the piston to bottom all the way out back. Should go back in nice and smooth. Alright, we're tight. We'll reverse that just a few. And spin this back in for when we get to the other side. Alright, next step is to use your little hanger. Could be a coat hanger, could be a little S-hook that I got off of Amazon, something like that. I want to hang this caliper up out of the way. You don't want it dangling from the brake hose there, because even though it might look fine, you could end up causing damage to the inside of the hose, causing it to collapse and ultimately not allowing you to brake properly. So I try my best to not let that get pinched, not let it get pulled on, push it up out of my way. Next we're going to check all of our slider pins, make sure they're free before we get ready and going here. Brake pads, always looking for even pad wear, looks like they are. So that tells me that the health of our caliper and the bracket is alright, so that's good to go. Our next step is to get rid of the caliper bracket, which will give us access to the rotor here. That is going to be a 17mm socket. I like to use a 1/2 inch on that, just to give myself a little more leverage. I do have my 1/2 inch little sort of breaker bar ratchet thing here that I like to use for these. And again, the car was well taken care of. Should just break loose. I like to get them both loose before the caliper bracket starts flapping around. Use a shorter ratchet would make this a little bit easier. I like to do things the hard way sometimes. Just like that, that's hand backing out. You can also use your electric ratchet like I have down there. Doesn't feel like switching to a 3/8 17mm to use that. Tight still. Alright, the next step is I like to clean up my caliper just to get everything prepped up. I'm going to take the old clips or slides or whatever you want to call them out of the bracket here. The new pads came with new stuff. Whenever I have new stuff, I use new stuff. Whenever it calls for new stuff, I use new stuff. Alright. I like to use a little wire brush just to clean up the surface areas here. Doesn't need to get super intense, you just want to make sure it's a nice flat surface. As material starts to build up over time on that, you can make it hard for the brake pads to slide back and forth nice and easily. And this car doesn't look too bad. Alright, so next what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply a little bit of grease to the bracket itself. Some people disagree with this, say that it ends up causing stuff to build up on the bracket, but it will be under the slides, so we're not going to worry too much about that. I've prepped up all my parts, I've cleaned the rotors. So now we're gonna go in here and the clips where they belong. They are directional on this particular set. So just make sure you take a look at what was in there before. Make sure again you match up. So everything slides around the way it should. Like I have something backwards here. Alright, I found the right hardware. Time for more grease. You're gonna put some grease on there. All of the metal slides. In my opinion, you can't have enough grease when doing a brake job, so it keeps everything moving. And finally, we're gonna pull out these slide pins that were a little bit seized up initially. Wipe all the old grease off of there. Make sure they're not in too bad a condition. You want to look for any corrosion. There's some marks on there, but those should be fine. All that's good. Sometimes they can be specific to top or bottom for the slides or for the pins. So I like to do one at a time. Make sure that we're light little coating of grease, not too much. Too much can cause pressure to build up inside there and cause the pin to push out prematurely. Yep, so these are directional. One of the slides, in this case the bottom one, has a little rubber grommet on it. So just always want to make sure those go back in the holes they belong in. Sometimes they won't even fit. Alright, everything's seated in their seals, and we're going to put our prepped brake caliper bracket aside for now. Alright, this is our 3-pound hammer. Our 3-pound hammer is going to take care of our rotor here. It is pretty seized on there. We're going to help him out for his next brake job and put some anti-seize behind that. If you were reusing the rotor for whatever reason, you would want to use a mallet of some sort, but we're going to make some noise today, take this baby off, put the new one on, and put some anti-seize behind that. So let's get banging. And it just took one. Frickin' Thor. Alright. With any mechanic job, you end up running into stuff occasionally. In this particular case, we have the wrong sized rotor. So what we did is we called the shop, or the parts store rather, and they're going to bring us the correct ones for the front of the vehicle. In the meantime, what we're going to do next is we're going to prep up the hub surface here. Let's take a wire brush, clean that up a little bit, put some anti-seize on it, and we'll get ready for the next steps. Probably skip down to the rear a little bit. Alright, this is what I usually use to clean hub surfaces. They do make other adapters that do a little better job getting around the studs here. I like to use this though, it's just a little more high powered. Seems to get the job done a little bit better. So let's clean it up. It's not going to be perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was. Alright, the goal is just to have a smooth surface so that the rotors don't kind of get cockeyed in there and end up running out. Next up, we're going to put on a little bit of anti-seize. This stuff is super messy. Basically what this is it's like a metal paste that ends up going on the hub surface, and it helps keep your rotor from sticking and rusting to it over time. Try not to get any on the studs. I'm always really bad about that. But alright, well, you're going to see the rears after this, but did finally end up getting the parts from the O'Reillys. So we got the correct brake rotors. We've already cleaned up the hub surface. We put some anti-seize on there. Fix the new rotor. Next up, we're going to put on the caliper bracket. Alright, we're going to install our caliper bracket and the bolts. We're going to make sure those are torqued down. Those are the holes we want to line up. Start by hand threading in, always. Make sure the bolts are clean. And they should be sliding in there smoothly. These are handy dandy electric wrench here. Get those suckers in. And 17 millimeters going in. Righty tighty. Alright, next up, torque wrench time. Make sure to set the appropriate torque. Look that up on your own. You can use the shop manual, you can use Google. Sometimes Google's unreliable. But this is going to be at the max end of this torque wrench, I think. Just smaller 3/8 for fitting in these tighter spots. Lick. And And click. Next up, we're going to get the brake pads in. With our front brake pads, we're going to apply a light coating of brake grease to the back of the pad. Again, don't want to touch the actual braking surface of the pad. Cause you to not stop, smoke, smell like smoke. Just get these coated up. And the pads should slide in pretty easy. No hammering, not too much pushing. Blinded by lights. Alright. Those are in. Next up, we're going to put our caliper back on. And we're sliding our caliper on because we compressed the piston already. Should sit over the top real nice and easy. Probably no tension. And we push the brake pedal before we get our customer going here. That will tighten everything up. The rotor won't flop around as much. The pads will clamp down. And it should be all good. And tight for the caliper bracket bolts. Typically these are going to be around 20 to 30 pounds, foot-pounds of torque. Let's torque them down. $14 millimeters, tighten down, torque down. Click on that. Click there. Last step is we're gonna get a quick check-in and then put the wheel on. All right, quick ones through. Caliper slider pin bolts are good. Got our bracket bolts torqued down and good. We got grease on all the parts that we need grease on. Brake rotor surface is good. Let's get the wheel on. Alright, I got my lugs hand threaded. Let's give them a quick little burp. Going in a cross pattern, make sure that torque is applied evenly. And we will come back and we'll torque those down at the end. Next up for you guys, I guess, is the rear brakes. Alright, on with the backs. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use our 21 millimeter. So 21 millimeter impact socket, get the wheel off, and we'll start rocking and rolling on the backs. Nice thing about Japanese cars is a lot of the time the fronts and the rears sockets are the same. In this case we have a 14 millimeter socket for the caliper slide pins in the back. Alright, I need a wrench. But it is not a 17 millimeter wrench. So let's see what we got here. I bet 15. Not a 15, maybe a 14. I'm always forgetting shit. Alright, there we go. Found my ratchet, got my wrench. Stuff is just flying everywhere. A little bit tight on this bottom with the brake hose. Got enough of that socket on there though that we should be fine. Alright, again, we're going to take out the bolts by hand. We can use an electric ratchet. I got nothing going on today though. We're going to be low stress. Alright, I mentioned I had a pistol grip, caliper compression tool. This is kind of the deal, it's all bent out of shape. I need to order a new one. But in the meantime, it still does the job. My other kind just doesn't fit in there. Caliper's too far pushed out. A couple different ways you can get these things compressed. I just feel like having the right tool definitely helps. This needs to be replaced. Yeah, all bent out of shape. Alright, with that, our caliper is all tucked away. Again, you want to use a hanger of some sort just to keep that caliper from dangling from its brake hose. This guy here, put it through one of the bolt holes, hang it on the suspension. Somewhere. Alright, next up, caliper bracket. Alright, I took the old brake pads out. Those are very worn down. Maybe a little bit uneven, but the caliper did push in fine. Both caliper slide pins are fine there. Alright, the caliper bracket bolt on the back are 17mm. It's just this top bolt here and this bottom bolt there. Again, want to use a heavier duty ratchet of some sort. Something with a longer handle to break those loose. Typically they're torqued down a little bit more than the slide pins. Alright, break those loose. Let's get them to a point where you can spin them out. Now we got our caliper bracket off. Got our bolts up there. Next up, we're going to prep the caliper bracket. Alright, we got the caliper bracket here. We're going to get rid of the old slides and grease up the pins. Put some grease on, a little bit of everything. Sometimes you need a pry bar or a screwdriver to get these out. And let's get dirty. Alright, we got our caliper bracket all prepped up. Basically what we did is we put some grease on underneath the clips there, put some grease on the clips, and then we peeled out the sliders there, lightly greased those up, wiped them down. So our caliper bracket is ready to go. What we're going to do next is we're going to get this caliper out. And this one just didn't need a hammer, so that's real nice. Looks like we have a little bit of grooving on there. Typically, rotors are going to be replaced when you do a brake job. Pretty much every time now. There's less material on them. I also just don't have a lathe. So it is up to the customers on how they want to handle that, but usually I advise just replacing them. Alright, next step is we're going to clean the hub face there. Again, with our wire brush. It's not going to always be perfect, but you get it as close as you can. We'll throw a little anti-seize on there. Try to keep it from sticking next time around too. Not too much. I'm sure it flings around when the wheel starts spinning. Right on the hub face. Alright, when putting new rotors on, especially ones that use a brake shoe style handbrake or emergency brake, you're going to have a little empty spot right there. That is the plug for adjusting the parking brake. So you have to take that off the old rotor. Just going to use some sort of screwdriver. Sometimes it will allow your finger to push it out. In case we can use a pry bar of some sort. Essentially, you just don't want to leave that open and expose the parking brake and the inside of the brake rotor to all the road debris. Alright, just like that, it is in there. When throwing the rotor on, especially with the brake shoe style handbrake, you want to make sure it slides on nice and easy. Otherwise, there should be an adjuster around there somewhere where we could compress it in a little bit if we had to. Most of the time I don't. So we're just going to go ahead, put that on, make sure it sits flush. Pretty. Next step is we're going to throw on our caliper bracket. Alright, when you're reinstalling your caliper brackets, always take a look at your bolts. Make sure they're not too rusted out or anything. Clean them up if you need to. In some particular cars, you're going to replace these. This particular car looks to be that they are hardened, better metal, so they can be reused. Sometimes they'll have some thread locker on them. You can definitely do that if you want. So let's get the caliper bracket on. I'm going to do it the same way that we took it off. We're just going to get our bolts hand threaded in there. Make sure I grab the right ones. I got 2 sets of bolts up there. Always hand start your bolts. Make sure that you don't cross thread them. Haven't done that yet. Don't plan on doing it. Alright, those are hand tight in there. We are going to use a torque wrench to make sure that we're tightening the stuff the way it should be, so the bolts don't back out. Make sure you look up your torque spec for the bolts. Click. Don't want to keep tightening too much past that click. Alright, that should be tightened in there. Next up, we're going to get our brake pads on. Alright, with brake pads, again, we need to add some more grease. I like to add a coating of grease to the back. Quote, the back of the pads. Don't get it on the braking surface. You also want to get it on the edges here just to help it slide along. And this just keeps all the moving parts from making extra noise, from binding up, all the surfaces they're rubbing against. Alright, I always like to make sure that these clips are on the bottom. In this particular case, it looks like I could have put it on either side. Start with the back pad, make sure it slides in there nice and smooth. Shouldn't have to fight it too much. Of course I say that and it wants to fight me a little bit. Sometimes it's just that the clip isn't all the way seated. There we go. Alright, so they should slide in. You shouldn't have to hammer them, do anything like that. Next step, we're going to get the caliper back on. Alright, with our caliper off of our S-hook up here, just going to slide it on. Should go on nice and easy. Since we have the caliper compressed. We're going to take our guide pin bolts, slide pin bolts, hand thread those suckers in there. Now these have quite a bit less torque required to get them tightened, and they will snap if you over torque them. So again, get out your torque wrench, set it to the appropriate torque, and get those tightened properly. Alright, now that we got everything back together here, I like to do a once over just to make sure that I torqued everything down, everything is greased, everything is the way it should be. We got our caliper bracket bolts torqued. We have our caliper slider pin bolts torqued. Pads have grease on them, the slider pins have grease on them, the clips have grease on and under them. We've got our rotor on, we've got the parking brake adjuster grommet on there. We're going to make sure we shut off any tools, get those out of our way, and we're going to get the wheel on. Last step. Alright, we got the wheel on, hand threaded on the lugs, got them tightened down just a little bit here with the impact. Didn't put too much pressure behind it because I'm going to go back with the torque wrench once I'm all done with all the different sides, and we'll get it torqued down properly. Alright, we got all the wheels torqued, we got the hubcaps back on. We're going to get in the vehicle, we're going to do some of our last steps here to make sure the vehicle is ready for our customers. Sit down, we're going to start by pressing the brake pedal. It's going to feel loose for the first few pumps. Just pressing it slow, making sure we build up pressure again. That's just the brake pads seating back down here. Alright, and then the final step is going to be a quick test drive just around town. Make sure we don't have any weird noises or anything. Alright, as we get ready for a test drive, I'm looking at the dash, making sure that we don't have any lights on. You could have an ABS light or the brake light if fluid was some sort of issue here. Our goal is no noise. If we were to hear any sort of noise, it might be like a slight tss, 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 tss. That is just the pads wearing into the rotors and mating up to that surface there. Most of the time that doesn't happen, and some weird occasions, sometimes you'll have the wheel weights rubbing against the caliper just because the caliper is now adjusted to a different position. So if they would have gotten wheels in between brake jobs, or tires rather, you could have some noise from that. But let's go for a quick drive. Alright, the test drive is done. Slight little noise just with the pads wearing into the rotors. Took it apart again just in case. Everything looks to be fine and wearing in just fine. If you have any questions about how to do the brakes on the 2017 Toyota Rav4, feel free to email me at mitch@onlybrakesmn.com. Again, that's mitch@onlybrakesmn.com. Thank you. Have a great day.